Well, if you'll allow me to say up front, I have never had to compete with a performance like the one before we just had now. So you're going to see a scientist with PowerPoint, which is probably the most disappointing part of the proceedings. But I will struggle on. Your Excellencies, Minister Sharon Dijksma, Mr. Arnie Matheson, distinguished guests, gracious Dutch hosts, ladies and gentlemen, as previous speakers have articulated, our ocean is essential to life on Earth. Oops. Not only did life originate in the oceans, but its ongoing survival is deeply rooted in the ocean processes that regulate our atmosphere, stabilise our climate, and support a productive biosphere that supports the involvement of millions of species and the nourishment of billions. Now, as has already been said, over 1 billion people derive their food and livelihoods from the ocean. And the weather and climate that surrounds us is also driven by the climate, by the ocean. And much of the oxygen we breathe comes from marine plants. Now, this ocean is also a source of great inspiration in terms of its relationship to over hundreds of cultures. And of course, it's our passion, our security, and our future. Consequently, you'd think that if the ocean was so important to us in terms of our human survival and survivorship and so on, you'd think we'd be looking after it. But of course, unfortunately, it appears we're not looking after our ocean. And as a consequence, and as has been echoed already this morning, our ocean is in deep trouble. And as a result, there are significant risks to humanity if we don't take action. And this, of course, is what brings us together today and over the next few days. And I want to spend 20 minutes here discussing 3 issues that I believe will be important to our discussions over the next few days. Firstly, I want to remind you of the changes that are upon us, from fisheries to ecosystems, the very clear evidence of global degradation occurring at unprecedented rates. Secondly, I'd like to emphasise the point that a failure to deal with the issue of global climate change will destroy any amount of effort to create sustainable solutions for ocean resources. And lastly, I want to emphasise that the game is not over. In fact, solutions are in sight, and it is not too late for us to establish a sustainable ocean that delivers greater human well-being through improved food security and blue growth. However, if we are to achieve a sustainable ocean, we'll need to take effective ocean action right now, today. Well, there's no doubt about the problems that our ocean faces. Pollution from chemicals and plastics have begun to choke entire coastlines, and toxic, low-oxygen dead zones are expanding exponentially and now occupy an area the size of Italy. At the same time, many of the world's most valuable ecosystems, the planet's coral reefs, kelp forests, oyster beds, and mangroves, are disappearing at the rate of 1% to 2% per year. And these, and the many other changes that are occurring, are starting to restrict the ability of the ocean to support people and communities. Many fisheries are in trouble. The FAO estimates that 1 in 5 fisheries is depleted, and that another 40% of the world's fishery species are fully exploited. Non-market fisheries are also degrading rapidly, exposing millions of people to deteriorating coastal livelihoods. And these impacts, from our deepest seas to our coasts, are threatening to foreclose on future opportunities and ocean wealth. And as we all know, on a planet that's about to add another 3 billion people, the consequences are extremely serious for humanity and our future. Despite this bad news, I stand with you today convinced that we can avoid these consequences and that the threats to our future and our ocean are soluble. But it comes down to taking that real global action. By taking global action today, we can set the world on a pathway towards improved food security and blue growth. This is more than just a glimmer of hope, it's a beacon of opportunity. And by taking action today, we can resolve many of the problems that face our ocean and its ecosystems. For example, if we implement best practice with sustainable aquaculture systems, for example, we can improve the productivity and health of our coastlines very significantly and quite rapidly. If we repair our depleted fisheries, we can boost fish populations to a level where we can harvest them productively and sustainably, feeding more people as a result. And if we stop the destruction of key habitats and ecosystems, we can restore the goods and services provided by coastal and ocean ecosystems, providing access for people and communities to jobs and opportunity. And the good news is that there's still time to correct our current global trajectory. And much of what will be discussed and workshopped over the next few days will be how to implement an aggressive action agenda to address these challenges. There is, however, one great fly in the ointment. Climate change, under business as usual, threatens to derail most of the actions we take or are going to take to solve the ocean issues. A few weeks ago, as coordinating lead author, I participated in the approval process for the latest report from Working Group 2 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Approved by 195 nations in Yokohama, Japan, the IPCC's fifth assessment report delivers the latest and most comprehensive scientific assessment of climate change. The report is a sobering read. The climate crisis has deepened significantly since the last report in 2007. One of the most significant findings of this latest report is the rapid expansion of climate impacts within the ocean. These warning flags indicate beyond a shadow of doubt that the world's ocean is warming, acidifying, and expanding rapidly, and that the resulting consequences for ocean ecosystems and people are extremely serious and dangerous. Like the monstrous kraken of Icelandic legend, it now appears that the once immutable ocean is now stirring, and that great changes are beginning to occur, driven by the added heat and CO2 from the burning of fossil fuels, and to a smaller extent changes in land use and deforestation. These changes are about to make the job of responding to other non-climate change related challenges faced by the ocean much harder, if not impossible. Behind me is a summary of the most significant impacts that are being reported by the IPCC. These are changes that have been detected and successfully attributed to climate change. Note that there are developing risks on every continent and every part of the ocean. The ocean impacts there are indicated by small green fish. And very significantly, these changes have been driven by tiny changes relative to those projected to occur this century. We're talking only 0.61 of a degree Celsius since the pre-industrial. And they indicate a much greater sensitivity of ocean ecosystems to climate change. Small changes in temperature, for example, have already shifted the position of key fish stocks, in some cases by hundreds of kilometres. At the same time, pest species and marine diseases are already expanding and spreading to new areas as waters warm by these very small amounts. Small changes in ocean chemistry, driven by ocean acidification, have already decreased the ability of some key organisms, such as pteropods, corals, oysters, and crustaceans, to form their skeletons and reproduce. And relatively small amounts of sea level rise have increased the exposure of millions of people and coastal ecosystems to flooding, storm damage, water shortages, and so on. Well, if we continue on this pathway, as we are, many marine ecosystems such as coral reefs and kelp forests will disappear as average global temperature rises above 2 degrees relative to the pre-industrial. Disruptions in other ecosystems will occur at this point that will escalate to fisheries, to ecosystems, and to people. And given its transformative effect, this level of climate change has been accepted by the international community as the limit, the 2-degree climate change guardrail, beyond which it's extremely unwise, in the opinion of these nations, for global society to venture. However, as this latest IPCC assessment report reports, greenhouse emissions have increased more in the last 10 years than they have in the last 30. And we are currently on track to increase average global temperatures well beyond 4 degrees above the pre-industrial. If that happens, many ocean ecosystems will have ceased to exist and will have been transformed beyond recognition. Many organisms will have relocated thousands of kilometres across the ocean, most disappearing as habitat and ecological characteristics at higher latitudes increasingly fail to meet their needs. And most fisheries will have been completely changed. In some cases, there may be some short-term benefits, but in the overwhelming number of cases, the impacts are likely to be highly negative at 4 degrees Celsius and above. And as ocean waters warm, they become more structured, they're less mixed, leading to an expansion of those dead zones where many forms of oxygenic life, such as fish, will have disappeared and ceased to exist. It's not a safe or pretty world, and it's not a world in which we can increase food security or blue growth. You might be surprised at this point to find out that I'm an optimist when it comes to whether or not we're going to solve the climate issue. I believe we'll solve the climate crisis for three very clear reasons. The first is we don't have an alternative. Not dealing with climate change is unthinkable, as I've just explained. The second is that solutions exist and can be implemented at scale today. And the third is that the cost of implementing these solutions is small. The most recent estimate from the IPCC is that it will only take around 3% of GDP over 30 years. That's a sacrifice of 0.1% of GDP growth, which is tiny compared to the huge costs of climate change impacts on people and industry that are expected. But before we move off the topic of climate change, I think it's important to note that efforts to solve non-climate change issues will be more important, not less. The fact is that climate change will continue to change for a number of decades beyond today, even after effective action has been taken to reduce greenhouse emissions to low levels. For this reason, we need to quadruple our efforts to solve non-climate change related questions to give the world's ecosystems, and that's on land and in the sea, a chance to get through the next few decades of stress. And this is yet another very compelling reason for ramping up our collaborative efforts to deal with broken fisheries, damaged ecosystems, and rampant levels of marine pollution. There is good news, however. The world is waking up to the challenges, as we've heard from previous speakers. Over the past 2 years, there's been a large number of international summits run by leading organisations. Charles gave you some of the insight from The Economist, but there's been The Economist, World Bank, Pew Foundation, United Nations, and many others. In each case, these summits have involved a wide array of people and perspectives, leaders from industry, conservation, science, entrepreneurship, government, and philanthropy. And in each case, there's been a strong articulation of the problem and a strong acknowledgement that our current strategy to develop solutions has not had the success required at the global scale. And in each case, there's been a recognition that the next generation of solutions will have to be very different if we're going to reverse the decline in ocean health. And at the same time, we've seen the development of initiatives such as the World Bank's Global Partnership for Oceans, which sprung to life at that first Economist Summit 2 years ago in Singapore. From these activities, global communities of practice focused on restoring habitats, reducing pollution, and repairing fisheries have begun to consolidate and coalesce as expert communities that stretch across hundreds of specialist universities and institutes have formed. Major donors and NGOs such as the GEF, World Bank, WWF, TNC and CI have joined an increasingly coordinated global effort. Getting all of the voices around the table, as we have heard, is crucially important and critical. I recently had the honour of chairing the Blue Ribbon panel for the Global Partnership for Oceans, bringing 22 leaders from many sectors. We've got a few of them up here in the picture. Questions were posed over what the next generation of solutions might look like and how they might be operated and implemented. And several important ideas fell out of those first few meetings of the Blue Ribbon panel. The first was that everyone on the panel, no matter what their background was, whether they were a seafood industry CEO or a conservationist, were strong advocates for a sustainable ocean. Everyone wants a sustainable ocean. The second point was that human well-being and food security were universally recognised as being central planks to any effective solution. And the third was that solutions must involve benefits that are balanced across communities, ecosystems and industry, this being critically important for any lasting solution. And the last point was the unanimous recognition as well that solutions are destined to fail if they don't have an inherent viralness or scalability built into them. These new ideas need to have a compelling market logic to them if they're going to be able to spread across the world in time. The panel also investigated the idea of public-private partnerships as having great potential for creating these viral and scalable impacts on the problem. The key concept here being that market forces, when harnessed effectively and correctly to protect ecosystems and people, have the potential to revolutionise the speed and effectiveness with which we can repair fisheries, restore ecosystems and reduce pollution. And while there's been much thinking, the opportunities for these public-private partnerships is being heightened by the amount of private interest, as Charles pointed out. So let me summarise. Like the response to climate change, the out-of-the-box thinking that's going on globally is establishing a new paradigm, I believe, and a new agenda for hope. However, let's not mislead ourselves. The task ahead of us is gargantuan and huge, and time is running out. The next 5 to 10 years, speaking as someone studying these systems, will be critical. We must solve the climate change crisis. We must quadruple our efforts to find solutions for non-climate change challenges. And we must repair fisheries, reverse habitat destruction, and reduce chemical and plastic pollution. We must build the resilience of ocean systems so that there's a good chance that they'll survive the coming decades of stress. And in doing so, we must recognise that the well-being of communities, the viability of economies, and the sustainability of ecosystems are all intricately linked. Solutions have to be fair and effective. We must understand how to take clever solutions to scale on effective timescales. And this is probably the greatest challenge we'll face as an international community. But if we solve these problems, we meet this challenge and beat it, then we stand to reap enormous rewards and to establish a strategy for solving food security through blue growth. In the next few days, we have an opportunity, indeed an obligation, to establish an agenda for ocean action. Right up front, we're very fortunate to have a good proportion of the global talent and leadership on ocean issues here today. This represents an ideal opportunity for us to create the perfect storm of change that is needed to transform our nations and to collectively approach the problems facing our oceans. But let's start this perfect storm by tweeting messages to the world about the urgency of ocean action. Starting now and over the next few days of the conference, I'd like to suggest that we use this newfangled technology to send messages to the world about ocean action. Your tweets, for example, could be messages of hope, issues of concern, or just simply brilliant ideas that you've had about how we can improve the health of our oceans. I understand that our hard-working summit staff will be collating these messages at the end of the meeting as a record of our first collective action along the pathway to global action on oceans that is so desperately needed. So finally, I'd like to thank the organisers of this important meeting. I'd like to thank the Government of the Netherlands, the Minister, FAO, the World Bank and their 5 partner countries for creating this much-needed international summit. Thank you.